Do you want to send emails with Google Apps Script? Well, this is the right section for you. We're going to be exploring the Gmail app service, also the mail service, all the different functionalities that can be done using these services, such as interacting with your Gmail inbox, selecting messages, getting the threads, getting message content, sending attachments, and also the mail service, which is a really easy way just to send an email using Google Apps Script. So this service allows you to send mail. It allows you to compose drafts, also manage the labels, mark messages and threads with stars, and also add labels to those messages. The mail service is a simpler format that allows you to send emails and you don't have to interact with your Gmail account. So there's two options for sending mail with Google Apps Script, and we're going to be exploring both of them in this section. So we're going to be showing you also how you can create an HTML template to send as an email. And there's a few different mini projects that we're also going to be working on that you can utilize and explore the code and use the code examples within your own projects. So sending an email using a doc as a template, also coding and adding attachments. So generating PDFs and different types of attachments from your drive and including them within an email. Also, how you can find messages and find threads using search within the Gmail app and return back information, get quota information, what your daily quota is for the mail service, for the email service, how to construct emails. So there's a number of ways where you can just have the regular email subject and body. You can also compose HTML emails and more complex email structures, including adding attachments. And labeling is another great resource within the Gmail app service where you can apply labels, you can remove labels, you can get messages with a particular label, create new labels, and organize your Gmail email account. Also interaction with the chat threads within the Gmail app service. Let's get started with some code examples for the Gmail app service coming up. In this lesson, we're going to be showing you how you can interact with your email and send emails from your Gmail all using Apps Script. So go ahead and log into your Google account. And then once you're in your Google account, go ahead and you can go to Drive and under the More, select and create an Apps Script. And this script is going to be a standalone script where we're going to be connecting to the Google Drive. So we'll make a connection to the Gmail app service, and there are two different services. So there's the mail service and the Gmail app service, and oftentimes there is some confusion which one to use. So the mail service is the one that's a simpler service that allows you to send just emails, and the Gmail service is one that allows you to interact with more of the advanced functionality within your Gmail. So if you're looking to just send emails, you can do it with either one, but the simplest one is to do it with the mail service. So let's go ahead and create a function, send my email, and it will send the email from the account that you're logged in as. And in order to write the Google code, in order to write the Google Apps Script, then you do need to be logged in to the account. So it's going to be sending it by that default account. So let's use the Gmail app service. And there's a number of options here when we enter in the Gmail app. And you can see there's quite a few there that we're going to be looking through. And the one that we want to do is just send the email. So it does require some parameters to send the email. And the first parameter that it does require is going to be the address that you're sending it to. So I've got a Gmail address, and I'm going to just be sending it to my own Gmail address. And then we'll take a look within the email, and we'll see that the email got sent. There's also an option for a subject. So this is a string value. And then there's also an option for a body. So let's break this apart into different variables. And then that way it's a lot easier to see what we're doing and what's contained within the email app class. So we do need the different parameters, and those are going to be the email, the subject, and the body. So those are the three that you need in order to send the email. And let's break those apart. And the subject, test, email, script, and within the body, and I'll just write hi, this is an email, and then we'll update some of these parameters later on as well. And within the Gmail app, that gives you an example here, so you can send the email, so you can select it, whatever the current date is, Gmail app, send email, so who you're sending it to, the title, and then the content of the email. So let's add in the email address first. Next, let's add in the subject, and then lastly, let's do the body of the email. And save, run the code. And when we run the code, what's going to happen is it's going to ask us for permissions because we're getting our app script to interact with another service. So we need to always accept the permissions in order for the app script to run and run the service. So let's go under the review permissions, select the account that we want to use, and under advanced, go ahead and select the name of the application that you're running. So this is the application name, so it corresponds to what we just created as Gmail app service. So that's the app that's going to be running. It gives you what permissions, so it allows you to read, compose, send, and permanently delete all of your email from Gmail. So it gives you the ability, and that's the Gmail app service, allows you to interact with all of your Gmail content, whereas the mail service only sends mail. So it's a lot more safe if you are looking to just send emails. Go ahead with the mail service. And I am going to be showing you an example of that as well. So here you can update and you can get your account permissions. So under the myaccount.google.com/permissions, you're going to have a listing of all the apps that you've given permission to. So you can go in there and always remove the permissions if you need. So now that we've sent the email, we can go into our email account. And we've got the email here from Google that we've provided permissions. And then under the email that we just sent, this is the email. So it's been received, it's been sent. And if you go into the sent label of your Gmail account, you're going to see that we just sent the email. So it registers the email as being sent, and that allows you to send it as a service. So let's take a closer look at what we can do with the mail service and the running of the mail service. So just create another function, my email to, and I'm going to copy all of the same values because the mail service and the Gmail service are extremely similar. So it's going to be relatively the same thing, except that we're not using the Gmail service, we're using the mail app. And then we can send the email. So there's not as many methods that are available. So we only have the send email and get remaining daily quota. And we can use the same parameters as we did with the Gmail. And let's give this a value of 2 and 2. And save this. And let's run the send my email to. So run that function. And we have to accept permissions. So this is accepting another set of permissions because now we're not using the Gmail app service, we're just using the mail service. So send email as you. So that's the permissions within the mail service. So a whole lot more secure than accessing your whole Gmail account. And again, it's a good option if you're just looking to send emails within the app script. And it's going to have the same parameters as the Gmail app when you're sending emails. So let's accept the permissions. Let the script run, and once we've executed the script, we can see that we've sent the second email. So there's the second email that we sent out. So same thing, same idea. You can go into your sent folder. You can see that you sent the second email, you sent the first one, and so on. So go ahead and try it. Create some scripts, send some emails to yourself, to your friends, and you're going to be ready to move on to the next lesson. In the previous lesson, we saw Gmail app service and mail app service. They can send emails and the format is going to be the same thing. So we saw that in the last lesson that literally the mail app send email and the Gmail app send email are going to be the same format. So you can use them interchangeably depending on which service you want to use and which one makes more sense. So let's go ahead and show you some options that you have with the mail service. And then from the rest of the lessons, from the ongoing lessons, we're going to be just strictly focused on the Gmail app. So mail service. And if we want to get the mail service quota, so let's go ahead and select the mail service. And we want to get the quota value. So selecting the mail app and get the remaining daily quota. And I'll just use the log and log that out. So log out that quota value variable that we just created. And save, and let's run. So we've got 97. That's our remaining quota for the mail service for today. Also, if we want to send an email, and then we'll check back the quota afterwards and we'll see what how it gets affected. So send my email, and I'll just give a value of send my email 1. And then within here, we want to send the email. So you could be just using the mail app and sending an email. So let's, again, we're going to create the variables. So email. And there's actually a way to get the current email address. So if you are just testing and you want to send it to yourself, you can use the session, and using the session service, you can return back whatever the active user email is, and that's what we're going to do. So within the script services, there's an option for a session, and this is a session service. So this gives you access to whatever the current active user is. So that's the one that's running the script. So that's going to be whatever one I'm running the script from, and we're able to get the email address of that session user. So within the log, let's log out what the email value is. So whatever the current active user is that's running the script, that's going to be what's returned back within the session. So this is just for testing, and so that I don't have to always keep typing in the email address. And it's going to be a little bit more flexible if I'm testing with different accounts as well. So we need to accept permissions because we're accessing another service. We're accessing the session service. And that allows us to select. And within the info, we get the email address. So we can use this as a variable in order to send the email address, or get the email address that we want to send from. And next, let's create a variable for subject, and we'll just create and just write test email for our subject. And then for the HTML, let's create some HTML content and add the HTML content into the email. So within the email, last time we saw we can send an email by using the mail app and send email method. And there's different parameters that you can enter in here. In the example, they have the email, they have the subject, and then they have the HTML, which is the body. And if we want to send it as HTML, I'll show you how to do that in this lesson. So let's send the email. And we've got the test email, and it's not being output as HTML. So we want to actually output it as HTML, and that way we can send it within a body and send it within the options of the body of the email. And this is going to be contained within the advanced parameters. So the advanced parameters, they accept it as an object format. So instead of having all of the string values, we're going to create an object out of it. And then we need to specify who it's going to. So the to is going to be set to whatever email address we're setting it to. The subject is going to be set to the subject. And these are just comma separated, so they're within the object. And HTML is going to be actually HTML body. And then we've got the HTML code that we're sending. So you do it within an object format, so it's just wrapped within an object. And you can also keep it separate as well if you want. So just for clarity, we'll keep it as a separate object. So this is the advanced format. We're sending it in as an object format. And now let's send the email within the object format. And this is going to allow us to send it as HTML email. So that way we can see the content and we don't see the HTML tags, and we're able to send the email as HTML. So there's a few other options here that are really nice when you are sending the content. You can send attachments as well within the different formats. So you can have the attachment within the send email, and we can also keep it within the object format. So if we have some additional parameters or options, let's make a selection and we'll call this send email 3. So we're going to need the user as well. and we can get rid of logging the user. So this is just a test email, and it's going to have attachment to the email. The HTML, so we're going to keep the HTML content just as regular content. And then within the object parameters, this is where we can set different parameters here and set them up as options. So these can be options that we have for the email. And if we want to send a file from our drive, so let's say we do have a file that we want to attach, and going into the PDFs there, and let's find let's find a PDF, and we'll attach one of the PDFs. So we've got a number of PDFs. So we want to get this PDF by ID, and select the get link. And within the get link, that's where we can grab the ID of the PDF. So just copy the link. And within the Google email, this is where we're going to have the link for the attachment. So this is going to be the ID of the file that we want to send. And let's strip out the rest, and we'll just keep the ID. So this is the ID of the PDF that we want to attach. And we need to get the file within an object format. So using the Drive app service, get the file by ID, and then we've got the ID value of the file. And the attachment is going to be added in as one of the options within the options in the email. So let's set up, and we're going to send it the same format as we had before, where we do the send email, and then we've got the subject, and then for the body of the contents, and then this is where we can list out all of the options. So this is expecting an object format for the options, and if we want to set and send a name, and let's just call this my file, and this should have quotes around it, expecting a string value here. And then for, instead of subject, let's do attachments. So let's setting up the attachments. And then this is because this is expecting multiple objects, so within an array format. So that's where we've got the attachments. We want to just attach the file object. And you can do get as in order to ensure that our meme type. So let's select the meme type. And let's set the meme type to PDF. And that should actually be uppercase. So select the meme type as PDF. And save. So let's try to send the document within an email. I'll run the service. We need to accept the permissions once again, because we're using the Google Drive. So it's accepting those permissions to see all downloads of your Google Drive and allowing the script to run and access content on the drive, since we're selecting it by ID. And what it's doing is it's taking the file, it's attaching it to the email and sending the email out. So let's go take a look and see what we got. So we've got the attachment here, and it's been attached to as a PDF file to the email. So also let's take this one step further, where we're going to send it as one of the options is going to be for the parameters. We're going to use the HTML body instead of the HTML content. So we can just leave this one blank. And then under the options, let's add in the HTML body. And then for the HTML body, we're going to use the HTML content. So this will send the file with an attachment as an HTML file. So let's try that out one more time. And I'll just give it a 2 there so it's something different. And run. And let's go back to the emails. And now we've got an HTML email and we've got an attachment. So there's more options for the options as well. So sometimes you find that one of the nicest and easiest ways is to just keep all of the options, and then you can have the email and the subject and everything within just the options. So that's one way. And another way is just to separate it out. So depending on what type of format, and this is also going to work within the GmailApp service. And within here as well, so you can add in CC. There's a number of parameters that you can add in. So it's CC, whatever the email address is. There's also the no reply. So this is a Boolean value that you can have. So no reply. And set this to true. And we can also set a reply to. So if we want to force the reply to email. So this maybe can be our reply to email. So just comma separate it out, and this is expecting a string value. And save, and we'll send it out one more time with some more of these parameters. So let's run the code and go into our Gmail. So now within the parameters here, so we've got the reply to, so there's the test email reply to, there's the emails that we sent, so we CC'd on that as well for the email address. So all of that is now contained within the email. So there's a number of options, and as mentioned, this will work within the Gmail app service as well. And let's do a quick check on our mail service to check what our quota is. So run that script. And so now we're down to 92 as we've sent several more emails throughout this lesson. So go ahead and try it out, and you can also check your quota just to make sure as you're testing, once you run out of quota, if you do have any errors and the emails aren't sending anymore, then just go ahead and check your quota to make sure that you still have room within your quota to send emails. And that will throw an error if you're out of space and if you're over the quota. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at the Gmail app service and some of the nice functionality that you can do with the Gmail app service. So of course you can send emails just as we saw with the mail app service. So it's going to be the same format. So send an email, and we'll just give it send an email 1, so the function name. And I'm going to copy some of the code out that we had before. We're sending an email, and we're getting that session email value. And you can provide the same options and everything else. So we're grabbing the email using the session service, and the session service just runs in the background and it gets some active session information. So there's going to be a little bit more on that later on. But if you want to find out what's available within the session, the different methods, so you can get the active user locale, the effective user, script time zone, get user, and get user is the one that we're getting there. So typically the one that I use most often is just getting the active user, getting the user information, and that's the user that's interacting with the script. Also, we set the subject, so that was fairly static where we set the subject. We added in HTML code. We got the ID of the file. We used the Drive app service in order to get the file by ID. So that created a file object that then we can use and send as an attachment. And we can keep all of these same parameters. I'm going to get rid of them because just to clean up the code a little bit, but you can add in all of those as options, and when you're sending it in as an object, you can send it a lot easier. So instead of the mail app, we use the Gmail app and send email. And then we're just going to send the same email as we did, and maybe I'll put 4 there so it's a little bit different, and send the same email as we did with the mail app. Let's run the script. And we've already accepted permissions in the last lesson to the script, so that's why there's no permissions option that's popping up. And let's go in and see we've sent the attachment and we've sent the file successfully. So let's also, and with the Gmail app, there's more options. So if we want to create a draft email, let's create a draft email. And using some of the same stuff that we used before. And we don't need to create an attachment. So we'll just get the email address, so from the session, and test email, just give it a different value there. Within the HTML, we'll keep the HTML as hello world. And then using the Gmail app, and there's a number of different methods here that we're going to be looking through as we go through the different options as we go through the lessons. So we can create a draft, and this draft email. So we're going to create a draft email, and then we're going to select the draft email and then send that out. So it requires just subject and then HTML. And if we do want it as an HTML object, let's leave that blank. And then within here, let's do HTML body and send the HTML code. So it's expecting the object information there. And let's run the make the draft function. And I think I got one too many quotes in there. So it's email, subject, body, and then we've got an option for the various options for the different object options. So if we want an HTML email, then we can send the HTML body object. So that script can run. And now if we go into the drafts, we've got the draft that's sitting there. And that's the draft content that's sitting there. So if we want to access the draft, we can go through and we can get the drafts that we have. So getting all of the draft emails. And I'm going to delete out this one here so we only just have the one draft. And we'll just discard the other draft there. So if we want to get the draft emails and send out the drafts using the Gmail app service, let's get the drafts. We can get draft if we have the ID of it. And if we get drafts, that's going to give us a full listing of the draft emails. And the drafts is going to return back an array of all of the drafts. So within the logger log, let's see what we've got for drafts. And run the get drafts. So we want to select that draft message that we just created. So we've got a draft object. So Gmail draft. And if we want to get the first item there, let's run that. And so now we've got the Gmail draft object. And within the Gmail draft object, we can loop through the different drafts. So let's create the loop for that. So let I equals 0, because this is 0-based array. And then loop through all of the drafts, increment I by 1. You could also do a for each as well. So that's another option. So you can do the for loop for the drafts, and then using the length value of the drafts. And logger log, let's log out the drafts, and using I as the index value for the different draft items. And I'll comment that draft and run the get drafts. So it's going to get the Gmail draft object. And as well, you can use the for each. So let's take the drafts. And personally, I do prefer to use the for each. So just get the different draft objects. And then within the logger log, we get the draft value. So let's run the get drafts. And so basically we're looping through all of the draft objects. And as we iterate through, we can do something with the draft object. So within the logger log, we've got the draft, and we can get the ID of the draft. We can get the message, and then we can also send it. So how about we get the ID, and I'll comment this out. So if we have the ID of the draft, that means that we can send it. So there's the two drafts that are sitting there that are within the drafts. So let me just refresh. And let's see what draft values are sitting there. So instead of just getting the draft, let's get the draft, and we'll get the message that's contained within the draft and run through. So within the draft, we've got the Gmail message and Gmail message. So within the messages, we can loop through the Gmail messages as well. And within the message, this is where we can get the subject. And I'll comment out the other stuff here so we can focus on the message object within the drafts. So we've got the two message objects within the drafts. So let's set a value for the message object. And then within the logger log, we'll use the message object that we just created. And within the message, this is where you can get information on what's contained within the message. So if we want to get the subject of the message, we can output that as well. So let's run that. And the reason we're still getting 2 is because we just deleted that other one, that saved time. So that's still sitting there, even though it's not visible within the drafts folder where we just have the one email that's just the one draft. So that's how you can get information about the draft. And if this is the draft that you want to use, and if you want to send it, we can check to see if the title matches the one that we want to send. So test email 5. So if the draft message and the message subject is equal to test email 5, then we can go ahead and take the draft object and just send the message. So let's run that to get drafts, and this time it's going to select that draft message and send the email. And now let's go back into the inbox. And we've sent that draft message that was sitting in the drafts. And now when we go back to drafts, it shouldn't be there anymore. It's not a draft anymore, it's a sent email. So when we run through, we don't have the draft email anymore, so that's gone. And that's been moved out of the drafts because we've sent the email. So that's how you can interact with drafts. You can create a draft and send drafts, all using the Gmail app service. So go ahead, give it a try. In this lesson, we're going to be getting all of the inbox threads. So we've got a number of threads within the inbox, and we want to grab them into a usable object within our Google Apps script and then output some of the content that's contained within those. So let's first create a function, and we'll call it get threads, or we'll just call it get my threads to avoid any confusion of any existing functions that are within Google. So we want to select the threads. So creating a threads object, and using the Gmail app service, we're going to get the inbox threads. So we can also get an unread count. So we'll do that as well, where we can log the unread, and I'll update this variable to be unread count, and then we'll do the threads afterwards as well. So update the variable and have it unread, and then we'll output the threads. So we get the inbox threads, and we'll log out the threads as well, and then we'll take a look at what's contained within these objects. So go ahead and run get my threads. So we get how many unread emails that we have. So we've got 11 unread emails. So it does a quick count of the unread emails. And then for the threads, it creates an array object. So that means that we can loop through all of the threads, and we can get the messages that are contained within those threads. So looping through all of the different threads that we currently have. So let's do that, where we can take the threads and use for each to loop through each one. And we'll give it a name of thread. So that will return back the thread object. And then within this array, let's log out each one of the threads as a variable name of thread. And I can comment out this because we don't need to look at this anymore. So let's do get my threads. So now we've got it as a Google thread. And with the Google threads, you've got some options to get the content that's contained within the thread, just as we saw within the messages as well. So we can get the labels, we can get the ID of these. So we've got a number of parameters that we can pick up. So let's add some of those so we can get the ID of those. We can also select from the thread. And just by going to the drop down, so you can get all of the messages, you can check to see if it's important, if it's in spam, if it's read, unread, and so on. So if we want to mark them all as read, we can do that as well. So let's take the thread object, and we'll mark read function. And before we do that, we'll get the ones that are unread. So thread, and we can get the messages, and as we loop through them, we'll check to see if it's read or if it's unread. And if this is unread, then we'll have a condition here and we'll log out that this was unread. So we'll get the thread object. And if we want to get the message info, so let's create a variable for messages. So this will take the thread object and it will get the messages that are within the thread. And we can also output the message count as well. So that's going to be just a value that we can output within the log. So we can see how many messages there are within this thread. So get message count. So it's going to be returning back value. And if we get the messages, so with the messages, we can loop through the messages and we can get the message information. So get the message object. And then within the messages, here we can check to see the subject of the messages. So that we can, each thread can have a number of messages contained within it. So if we're checking to see if it's unread and we want to get the message, so let's get the thread ID here. And then within the messages, we can output the message list. So for message itself, let's use the logger and we'll take the message object. And from the message object, we'll get the subject of the message. So logging all of this information out. Let's do a quick recap because I know I jumped around a little bit there. So we're running a function to get the threads. We already saw that we can get a numeric value for the unread count. So that's all of the threads. So it's getting all of the inbox values that are unread. And then it's getting the threads as an object, and we're looping through and getting the thread. And within the thread, we can get the ID, we can get the number of messages within the thread. And then if we want to output the messages and get the message information, such as the subject, then we can iterate through all of the available messages, and that's where we can pick up the subject. So it's going to list out all of the subjects that are within the messages. And then, of course, you can even get the message data and do additional stuff with the messages. If you want to take the thread, you can update the thread and set it as read or unread. So we're going to check to see if it's unread, and if it's unread, then we're going to mark it as read. So as we're going through the thread, we're going to update this and mark it as read. And then the second time that we loop through, they should all the unreads should be marked as reads. So let's give it a shot and we'll run the function. So what it's going to do is it should mark all of those as read, the ones that are unread. So do a refresh there. So all of the ones that were unread are now read, and still going through them. So there's quite a lot of information here. So we've got a bunch of emails that are coming back and a bunch of information that's contained within those emails. So we're getting the message titles and then the information on the messages. So quite a bit of stuff got returned there. And the second time through, so we are just going to get the message subject. And let's run through it one more time. And to simplify it, I know we're turning back quite a bit of stuff there. So as we go through, we're going to check to see if it's unread, and those are the only ones that we're going to check, and then we're going to mark it eventually as read. So let's run this one more time. And this time we should not be returning anything because we don't have anything that's unread. So if we want to see one of the messages, let's mark this message as unread and go back, run the script. So that should select out that one message. We get the ID, we get the message subject, and then that, when we refresh, that should now be marked as read. And that's all done with the script. So we're getting the ID, we're getting the subject, and then again within the message you can do quite a bit more. So if we wanted to, in particular, we want to take this thread and we want to respond back to it. So let's see what we've got within the thread object. We can reply to the thread. So doing a reply. And then for the reply, we do require some parameters there. And what reply will do is this is going to reply back to the message. So it's going to reply to the thread. And it just requires the one parameter. And we'll type in, got the message, I read it. That's going to be the reply. So let's, again, set this to unread and then run our script and we're going to be executing a reply to that email. And so now when we refresh, and there's our reply. So now we've got a message, read it. So now let's again, we're going to set it to unread and clear. And now within the same thread, we've got two messages. So we've got the test message, email 5 with the subject, and then we've got the reply to it. So now within the messages, we've got two. Within that one thread, we've got the two messages, and that's how you can distinguish between threads and messages. So again, we're sending back a message, and if we want to set this to unread again, now we should have actually three threads in there. So let's run that one more time. And we do need to set this to unread and run the code one more time. So this time we're going to have 3 messages within the thread. And we're replying back to the thread itself. We also, within the message object, we can reply to the message object as well. And this is just going to be a reply on the message. And it does sound very similar, but with Google, what you can do is you can apply to the whole thread, or you can select a message individually and reply to that message. So within your Gmail account, you can see that there is a difference here, that you can do a reply to the message, or you can do a reply to the entire thread. So that's what we're doing here, is we're replying to the message, but we're also going to be replying to the thread. And let's save that. And within the reply, it's only the one parameter. So we don't need to add in any different subject or anything like that. We can also select and reply using HTML. So let's also do that in where we'll add in the reply. And we can reply it as an object. So they've got options to reply. So if we want to reply as HTML, and then you can type your HTML code into the HTML body. And then here, just as we saw with the other options of the email, we can set a bunch of options here where we can send the HTML body, we can add attachments, and so on within the reply message. So let's give this a shot. So we should have 2 replies that we're sending, one to the thread and one to the message. And I do need to mark this as unread. Otherwise, it's not picking it up. And when you are testing, the reason that I am looking for the unread is because I don't want to send a whole bunch of email messages. I do want to limit the email messages that I'm sending. So that's why I'm looking for the ones that are marked unread and making it really easy for me to select those while I am doing my tests. So now let's go back into the email and see what we've got for the email. So we've replied to the thread. We've replied to the email itself. And this is all the information. So there's the HTML that we replied. And there's the thread reply. And notice that we've got 4 HTML replies. And the reason that we've got 4 there is that it's replying to each one of the messages. So it depends on where you've got it within the code. And because on the thread, we've only got it once, but over here we're looping through all the messages and we're replying to each one of the messages. So that's where we're getting the reply value. And if we want to set a variable to 1 and then make this dynamic as we loop through the messages, and actually I set this to 0 and then reply to message, and then here I can introduce the value of val. So it's a little bit more dynamic, and then within here as well, let's add the value of val. So now we're going to have a running count on the messages, and now it should have a whole bunch of messages. So let's run that one more time, and again, let's set that to unread and run. So it's getting the thread, and within the thread, we've got a ton of messages now. So it's just looping through all of those messages and sending replies to all of them. And let's see what this looks like. So going back in here, we've got 9 that are unread. And let's do a refresh on it. So we can see that we've got different values here for the replies. And also notice one thing that happened here as well is that it's not exactly within the same order. So it's got HTML 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So it is sending them, and it's not specifically sending them in the exact order. So also keep that in mind, but it really shouldn't matter because typically you wouldn't be replying to the same person 9 times. And this is just how the script is being run. So it could vary depending on when you're running the script. So it's just loading the email addresses and sending them out as they come in, and the server is just handling them. So depending on the load on the server, you might get this where the message order changes. And it's not what you might expect. So go ahead, try it out, get the inbox threads, and send out some replies. And also you can use the same trick that I was using where we're checking to see if it's read or not. And then that's how you can set that one testing email where you can do the replies and you can reply to the thread. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be sending an email from a template. So let's create a function and email temp sender. So sending an email from a template. And we're going to be using the HTML service and creating a template using the HTML service. So let's go ahead and create that email HTML object. So using HTML service, and we can create HTML output. So we can create HTML output, or we can create HTML output from a file. So let's first we'll create some HTML output, and this is just going to be email body, HTML body, and then creating an object that will hold the HTML. And this is requiring just a string value as we're constructing the HTML. Just type a quick message there with some HTML code wrapped around it, and we'll create the HTML from the output. And within the logger log, let's output the value for HTML body. And let's see what that looks like. So run the email template from sender. So we've got some HTML output there. And with the HTML output, you can get the content of the output. And that will just output and return back the HTML. So we've got straight HTML, an HTML object that we're ready to send within the email message. And let's set this up as the HTML body of the email. So we need an email address to send the email to. So let's use the session and get the active user, and we're going to get the email address of the active user, and also we need a subject for the email. So this is just going to be HTML temp, and that can be our subject for the email. And also lastly, let's create an object that we're going to use for the properties. So creating an object, just give it a name of prop, and then within here we're going to set up the HTML body, and selecting that HTML body object that we have. So it's going to be the HTML body, and we want to send out the email to the HTML body. So using the email format, the GmailApp, let's send the email. So GmailApp and send email. So look at the email address, the subject. Within the Gmail app, so it's slightly different than the Mail app, so you always do need to have the email, you need to have the subject, and then also the body, and we can just leave it blank if you're going to be overriding it within the properties. So let's send, and there's no option for the to and the subject within the Gmail app, so there's only an option within the Mail app. So it's a subtle difference between the two. So let's go ahead and try it out and see what happens. So we'll send the email template and go to our emails and see what we've got here. So we've got the HTML output as an HTML object, and we're outputting it as the HTML body. So it's not exactly as we're expecting, it's just sending it as the object name. So we actually need to get the contents. So if we want to send it as HTML, let's save, and we're going to run that and send another email. And now we've got the HTML. So you have to be careful of when the difference between the HTML body and the HTML. And we are creating it out of the HTML file. So we're using that in order to generate the HTML content. And let's just change it back to body, and we're going to use the mail app this time. So the mail app with the HTML body. And update this to mail app. And let's send that. So now we're using the mail app instead of the Gmail app to send it. And when we go to it, we still get the same thing where we've got the HTML object. So for both of them, they're going to work the same way, where when we're creating the HTML output, then we need to have it as just a regular string value for that content. But if we are generating it from a file, so let's go ahead and we're going to create a brand new HTML file. And this is just going to be for my email template. And within the HTML file, we can get rid of all this HTML object. Just write a message and close off the H tags. And now we can use the email as our template. So let's use the service and create HTML output from a file. So using the email as the file. And this is actually requiring the file name within a string format. So save that, and let's run this one more time. So update this back to the Gmail app and run the Gmail app. And now when we look at it, we've still got the HTML object. And we do need to run the getContent method in order to output the HTML content as a string value. So it's the same thing that we saw here, where we had a string value, then we're creating HTML output from it, and then we had to look at it within a string. So if we are sending it just as an HTML output, then it's going to just put that value, that HTML output, and that's actually the object name. So if we want to get the actual content, we need to update it to HTML body and get the content. So this is going to get the content from the file, and let's try to run it one more time. So this is actually Gmail app. Save, and let's run that one more time. So this time it should be coming through from the template as HTML. So let's take a look at it, and there we go. So we do have it as HTML. And the nice thing about having a template is that you can update some of the content contained within the template. So if you had your HTML and let's say you had a different title. So let's set a title value. And you also had a paragraph, and then maybe you had the person's name here. So I'm just using uppercase, and this is just going to be the needle that we can find, the name, and then maybe we have a custom message. And then you can change these as needed. And let's add name one more time. So we're going to add the same one twice. And I'll set this as an H2. So it doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to create a quick HTML template here. And then as we generate the HTML code, we want to get this as content. So we are doing it twice. So just get the as content, and that's going to simplify the code. So it's going to be putting out the HTML as that content. So what we want to do is we want to do a replace on the HTML body. So let's take the HTML body object, and we're going to replace the content contained within the HTML body using the replace method. So what do we want to find and replace? So we had the one that was the title, and we want to replace it with whatever our custom title is. And then you can go through and you can replace the HTML body with the values that you've set up. And this actually needs to be a let, because it's returning back a string value, and then we're replacing and updating that string value. So we also had a message and a name. So let's update those as well. And lastly, let's get the name, and that will just say username. So let's try that one more time and just give custom message and run the script. So go into our Gmail and let's see the custom message. So we got the custom message, we got the custom user and the custom title, but what happened is it only replaced the one instance of the name, and we actually want to replace all of the instances of the name. So a better way to do the replace is to use regular expressions. So that will allow us more flexibility in the content and also allow us to set flags. So if we want to replace it globally, the regular expression is going to be using the value of name with the hash in front of it. And let's save that. And we're going to run that one more time. And you can do that, update it for all of the replace. And that way we're replacing all of the content and using the same function where we're still using replace, but we're going to replace all instances of it. And that's just adding in the global flag. So the G flag will replace everything within the HTML file. So using the regular expressions gives you more flexibility on the replace, where you can set the different flags and also customize and also really fine tune what elements you're looking for and what you're replacing within the code of the HTML file. Hey, welcome. The project that we're going to be creating in this lesson is going to take a doc. It's going to transform it into HTML code and then use that as a template. And we're also going to update some of the content within the HTML on the fly before we send out the email as the user. So let me show you what's going to happen, and then we're going to work through how we can create this application. So it's using the HTML service in order to get an HTML. It's using a few of the services, such as URL fetch app, in order to make a fetch request to the URL. We're also authorizing it because this is just a regular web URL, and we need to make an authorization to access the content, and that's where we're using the script app service, so the URL fetch app service, as well as the session to get the active user. And putting all of this stuff together and what we learned in the previous lessons, we're going to create a template out of the document and send it over to our email. And then when we go over to the email, you can see that that content has been updated with the replaced content that we have within our Google Apps script. And the format and the structure is exactly what we have within our Google Doc. And if you were to update this, any of the colors or any of the content, and let's run the script again. And then we'll go over to our inbox and see the newly created document. In this lesson, we're going to create a doc, and then for this doc, we're going to use this as an email template to send out an email. So let's go ahead and go into the drive and create a brand new document and give this document a name. This can be our email template. And we can have, hi user, welcome to our website. Thanks. And my name. So we'll use the same hashes as we used last time. And we're going to generate this document as an HTML file. And then we're going to use that HTML file as a template to send out the email. And in order to generate an HTML file, you can create an HTML file out of any document when you download it as HTML. But you can also go to the docs.google.com and document D with the document ID, and instead of edit, if you update this URL to export and select format as HTML, it's going to export the format as HTML. So that will create an HTML download file and structure that current document as HTML. So let's go back into our function. And this is going to be sending the email as an HTML template. And I'm going to copy and paste that web URL because we are going to need it. Let's get the ID. And we're going to make it flexible enough that we can use any doc ID to send and use as our basic template for the emails. So set up the ID, and we are going to need the URL as well. So let's generate the URL with the ID. And I'll do this dynamically. So update the string value, and instead of having the ID, we're just going to remove out the ID from the string. So just concatenate together with whatever the ID value is. So that way we're going to be getting that same download URL link. And if we do a log of the URL, This is just going to be a regular string value. So let's try that. And within the web URL, the execution, we get that same URL. And so that's creating that download file that's going to be the HTML version of the document. So we can get the HTML by using HTML and then using the URL fetch method within the Google Apps script. And then using fetch, we're going to fetch to the URL. And now let's log out the contents of HTML within the log and run it. And we actually get this whole long, big piece of content. And what's going on here is that this is actually, if you output this HTML, this is going to be the login for the HTML document that Google is going to be creating. So it's getting the whole web page with login information because we don't have authorization to get it through a web URL. So this is where we need to create the authorization, and we can create the authorization for the URL fetch app method. And let's create some parameters. And you can use these, getting the parameters as well in authorization on the fly to the web URLs as needed. So using the method, and because we're already logged into the Google Apps script, we can generate a get authorization token. So within the script app, so selecting it as get method, and this requires an object, so it should just be a colon. And then within the headers of the fetch request, this is where we would set the authorization. So selecting the authorization object, and we need to set the authorization value. And the authorization is going to be the bearer, and then space that. And it's going to require the script app service and getting the authorization token. So there's a method called get OAuth token. So that's going to generate the OAuth token as authorization to access the content. And then we can comma separate out. So that's all we need for the headers. And then we also need to set the mute HTTP exceptions and set that to be true. And let me just double check mute HTTP exceptions. So if you're familiar with making AJAX requests, you do need this information, and this is just setting the fetch request with the right headers and be able to make the connection to the web URL. So when we do the fetch request, we're going to pass in the parameter object as param. And now let's try to do the request one more time. So the difference here is that we're actually connecting to the document, and you can see the contents of the document there. So it's generating it as HTML, and this is all coming from a web URL. And we're creating the authorization to the web URL by setting and sending through the authorization within the headers of the fetch request. So once we've made that connection and we've generated the HTML template, we can now use this as our template for the content and then email that out. So let's start by just emailing it out and setting up the email address. So let's get the email address. And just as we did before, we get session, get active user. So we're just generating the email. And of course, if you have an email that you want to send it to, then you would be putting that email address in there. Let's also generate and create the subject. So the subject for this is just going to be HTML from doc, and that's going to be generated from the doc ID. So you can also include the ID if you want, if you're working with several different IDs and objects. And then for the properties of the email, this is going to be the object where we're going to be sending the contents of the HTML as HTML body, and then assign to the HTML body property the HTML object. And then from there, we're ready to use the Gmail app and send the email. And then we're going to update the values that are contained within the email. So set up the email subject, and then just leave the body blank, and then pass in the property object. So it looks like we're ready to try this. And let's make and send this. Go into the emails and we'll see what we get. So we get the HTML from doc, we get the doc ID, and then when we open this up, we get all of the HTML content. So let's also update this and update some of the formatting. So we've got the heading as blue, and this can be heading and bold, make this red. So we've got some variety of content in the HTML. Let's send that one more time and see what happens, see what we get. So we get another email, and now we've got the fully formatted HTML and in addition to the styling, and this is all coming dynamically from the Google Docs. So you make any updates to the Google Doc, and that will update the content. And you can use various other Google Docs. So if you have the ID, you can just swap them really easily this way, just by swapping the ID that you're using to send the email. So let's make an update to the contents of the email. And we already saw this within the last lesson where we can do a replace on the HTML content. So selecting the HTML content and update it from const to let, as we're going to be updating the HTML. And then let's assign to the HTML using replace. I'm going to loop through the content and update. So using the regular expressions so that we can grab all the instances of it. And let's go back to the template, and we've got one for user and one for the name. And I'm going to just put it a bunch more times. So we can update all of those instances of user and G to flag all of them. So all of the instances. And let's put the user at Lawrence, and then do another replace and just double check my name. So actually that one should probably be Lawrence, but there we go. So that one will be, and we'll just do spec as teacher. So now let's try this one more time, and we're going to send the email with using the Google Doc as a template for the email, and generate the email on the fly and sending that email out. So with the updates and everything. So let's run. Error message that HTML replace is not a function, and that's because the HTML that's returned from the URL fetch, this isn't a string, and we're not able to apply the string method where we would with replace. So let's turn it into a string, and there's actually a method for that within the Google Apps script. So we're assigning to the HTML, and we're going to be just getting the content as text. And what this will do is this will turn it into a text format, and that way we can select the content and do the replace on it. So let's try it one more time, and this time sending out the email, we've done a replace on the content. And going over to our inbox, we've got the new document, and we've replaced all of the content, effectively using the doc as a template to send out an email. And let me just clean up the code a little bit. And you can use this functionality as well, where we're getting doc as HTML and using the URL fetch app method in order to select the doc and return it back as an HTML, and then use the get content text in order to turn it into a text format. And then of course you can still send the HTML code as text into the HTML body, and that will send the email as expected. So go ahead, try it out, and get more familiar with what you can do when you're sending and combining the various Google Suite of apps together. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be creating a project that's going to use a spreadsheet and send emails from the list within the spreadsheet. And we're going to be using a template that we're going to be updating the contents of the template. So each one of these users will get a customized email just for them. And we're also going to be tracking back the emails, or we can just call this one status, and then updating within this column as the emails get sent. And the way the script is going to work is it's going to run through, get the spreadsheet contents, and then slice out the data. So all of the data, not including the headers. That data then gets passed into another function that's going to use this email as a template. So it's an HTML email that we can use as a template. It's going to update the fields there with the hashes in front of them. and update it with some of the parameters that we got from the spreadsheet. So replace that, creating the customized email, and then using the Mail app, it's going to send this email from the list of people to the spreadsheet. So let's give it a shot and we'll see that works. So within the spreadsheet, it's going to update sent, and then within the email itself, we're going to have a whole listing of all of the emails that were just sent and that came in. So that's what we're creating in this lesson. Some emails from an email template, and the messages and the details for the email are going to be coming from a spreadsheet. So let's update our file and update this to first and last name. So we're going to create a template within the email.html file. So that's the email file that we used earlier. We can customize the title as well as first and last name, message, and then we can have a name from where it's coming from, or just remove that and have the name of the person directly within the message. And we're going to send it as an HTML message. So we'll say hi to whatever the first name of the person is. And then we can include the first name and last name again. And of course, you can customize this template as needed. So we're just getting a few parameters that we can use and add these into the spreadsheet, and then use the contents from the spreadsheet to send an email. So let's go ahead and go over to our drive. We're going to create a brand new spreadsheet, and we're going to have these as the main parameters. So let's select the spreadsheet and give it a name. I'll just call it emailer. And then for this, we have an ID. We have a first name, a last name. We have a title for the email, and also a message for the email. And this we double check. And we also have, so first name, last name, title, and message. So that covers the 4 different parameters that we have within the emails. So let's set up an ID, and that of course could be anything. So Lawrence and Svekis, and we'll just put a teacher, and then the message is going to be welcome to the school. And we do also need an email address here. So as we loop through the contents of the spreadsheet, this is going to be the email address that we're going to use. So I'm going to send it to the same one. And with the Google Gmails, you can actually add and create as many emails as you want by updating and doing a +1. So that's what I'm going to do, and it's all still going to go back to the same Gmail. So if you were to send an email to your email address and just do a +1 on the end, it will still go to your main email account. And the way the +1 works is that you can send it, so just append it to your email, and you can just do whatever your email address is and include a +1. And that will still send out to your main email address. And this is a way that you can have multiple emails that are going to look different, but they're going to go to the same person. So if we want to produce multiple emails, and the idea here is that we want to send out several different emails, different names of the person. And let's add one more. And just populate some content in there. And I'll update this to be +2. So it actually could be anything. It could even do +4 if we want. So anything that you add to the plus, it's still going to send to that main email. So all 3 of these emails are going to be going to our main email, and that way we can track and just make sure our script is working. And also I'm going to rename the sheet to emails. And now let's use our Google Apps script, and we'll connect to the emails. And I'll just call it sender. So first thing we want to do is select the spreadsheet object. So we use the spreadsheet app class, and we're going to open the sheet by ID. So we need to register an ID for the sheet. So let's construct that as well. So within the sheet, the easiest way is just to go into the web URL and select the ID that way. So let's add that in and open the sheet by ID. And let's create and select the sheet. So using the spreadsheet object and get sheet by name. So the name of the sheet is just email or emails. I think we had it plural. Let me just double check. And yeah, we did have a plural. So we want to get all of the data that's contained within the sheet. This is going to be a listing of all the email addresses. And then we're going to loop through those and send emails to each of the people and using the email template in order to do that. So let's get the content of the sheet. And we're going to get the active range. And actually, let's get the data range. So we get all of the data. And we can also take the data, and I'll just call it people. And we'll slice 1 from the data. And we need to actually get the values here in order to do the JavaScript method to slice. So that's going to slice out that everything. So let's take a quick look at what's contained within people. And the reason I'm using slice is that I want to not include the heading information. So if we're just getting all of the data, we're going to get the headers. And of course, we don't have any emails to send to the headers. So let's run the code and see what happens. So we should get the listing of all 3. Let's go through, access and provide permissions to the app to run and access the spreadsheet data. So it's going to execute through and it gets all of the data here. So we've got the first person, second person, and third person. And because of the slice, we didn't include the first row. So also within the log, if we were to just log out data, we would get all of the content that's on the spreadsheet. So that would include the headers. So if we want to include the headers, we could do that. And if we don't want to include the headers, which in this case we don't, we can just pull that out without the headers. So for the people, we can loop through for each, and we'll select each person that's contained within the people array. And then using the logger log, let's see what we've got for person. And each one of these, now they're going to be each one of the people. So it's going to provide us another array of information. So let's just see what that looks like. So now we've got the array of each row of information. So the first item in the array is going to be the ID. The second is the first name, then the last name, then the title, then the message, and then the email. So that's the email address that we're sending it to. So once we get this information, we can send it over. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to send it over to another function and send my emails, and I'll send that person information over as an object. And now let's create a function that's going to handle the send my emails, and it's going to take the person information. And within person, so let's set the variables that we have. So email, and that's going to be the person, and I believe we have index value of 4. Let's log it out and just make sure that that is a valid email. So that lists out, and nope, that didn't list out the email. So, because I had the ID. So the email is actually going to have the index value of 5. So it's always a good thing that we check there. So let's try that one more time. And because the email is such an important part, because this is where we're going to be sending the mail to. And we can actually just use the mail app service because we're just sending out a regular email. So send email and who we want to send the email to. So email, and then the subject from list. And then let's send the HTML email. So we want to generate the HTML email from the email client value here. So, and we need to still update the values that are contained there. So we want to loop through and get the content and create an email out of that content. So just what we did before, where we need to generate the HTML body. So the HTML body value and selecting the HTML service. We're going to create HTML from a template file, and the template file is just whatever the string name is of the file name. So it's email, so it's picking up that file name. And then within the HTML body, we're going to update it and do a find and replace. So using the replace method. And what do we want to replace first? So we're just using the title as the first one that we're going to replace. And using regular expressions. What do we want to replace the title with? So we do have this information here, and title is going to be the third value. So person and person 3 with index value of 3. And then let's just go through and we're going to replace the rest of the HTML body. So with the other values that we had, so we had first, and that's going to be with index value of 1. Last is going to be index value of 2. And let's double check, and we also had message as well. And just double check that we do have message. So it is with a name of message. And this is just going to be coming from the index value from person of number 4. So that means that we're ready to set, and we've created the HTML body. So we can use the HTML body variable in order to send that body value. And I do need a comma, so I was just missing a comma there. We'll create a quick test function in order to test our application before we try to send it from the spreadsheet. Send tester. And sometimes when you are debugging, it's a good way to do that, to create a test application. So just create an array of the data that we want to use, and we want to send to the Google account. So let's just make sure that I've got the right email address here. So selecting it, and the first one's just going to be an ID. Next is going to be the first name, and then after that is the last name, and then the title, message, the email address that we're sending it to. And then let's initiate the send the emails, and we'll pass in the array that we've just created. So this will match the arrays that we're building from the spreadsheet data. And run the test application so we can debug it. So under the test sender, just run the debug on it. So it looks like there's a problem with the HTML body, and actually we need to debug the test sender. And we do need to get the HTML as content. So let's add in the get content method. So that way we're getting it as HTML content. So I did miss that. So it's always a good idea, and this is a great way to kind of debug applications before you run it through the spreadsheet where you might have some issues, and then it's a little bit harder to debug. So build up your data that you're passing through, run a test function, and then run it through the debugger. So let's try that first, and it looks like that's sent. So let's just check our inbox, and we got the email. So that looks like everything is working. Our send my emails function is working after we did a test. So we're ready to run the sender function, which is going to loop through the contents of the spreadsheet. It's outputting the different rows of content, and it's grabbing the email address from the rows of content, and it's outputting into the logs. So that means that everything worked okay, and we should be able to see that within our emails that we got a bunch of emails sent to us. And let's double check that we've got the emails sent out. And there's our emails that came in from the list. So this one was addressed to Lawrence Svekis. So that corresponds with what our first one was. The next one, we've got Tester Svekis and welcome, and that's student. And then the last one is this one here. So it went to Mike Smith, and that was the email address that it went to. So we were effectively able to write a script that looped through and returned back and sent all of the emails to everyone within the spreadsheet. So let's add one more thing, because we do have the spreadsheet object open and we want to update to the spreadsheet set a value that the email has been sent. So let's do that as well, where we're loop through, and as we loop through, we're going to track the emails that are sent. So the email gets sent and we need to get the range. So the update range of within the sheet object, we're going to pick up the range. So do a get range, and we have a value for the range, so we can track that within the index value, and the index is going to be corresponding to the index of the array. So it's starting out at 0, so we're going to have to add to that in order to get the row number. So we're going to have to add to the index, and the index is starting at 0, but we need to add 2 because our list is actually starting in row 2. So for the range, we're going to have to provide a range of 2 for that. So let's set up a start value and take index, and we're going to add 2 to index. And so setting up the range, what do we want to update? So we want to update what column we want to update and what row we want to update. So the row that we want to update is going to be whatever the value of start is. And the column we want to update is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So column 7, we want to add content to column 7. And we only want to apply for one row and one column. So that's going to be the number of rows and columns that we're going to be updating. So that selects the range to update. And then once we get the update range, then we can set the value. And we only have the 1. So you can set value, or I'm going to keep it as values. So that way that if you have to update it, you can update multiple values. And multiple values are going to be expecting an array within an array. So we'll just update that to send. So now we're going to be updating the sheet as we're sending out the emails. Let's give it a shot and run the sender. And then as we loop through and we get the sent, we're updating the columns of sent. And you can add that as well in order to track what's been sent within the spreadsheet. In this lesson, we're going to be getting some of the emails and applying and adding a star to the emails. And we can do this to the email message. So within the Gmail message, this is where we've got an opportunity to add and remove stars to the message. So we need to select some of the messages, and we'll just create a function, stars and message stars. So first thing we need to do is we need to get the emails. So using the Gmail app, and we're going to get the inbox threads. And there's also some other options as well. So if we want to get the messages for threads, if we had a thread value, we could get those. So let's go ahead and we'll get the inbox threads, and then we're going to loop through them. And these are just going to be each individual thread, so returning that value. And then let's log out the threads for now, and then we're going to select each thread. We need to select the messages within the threads in order to apply the star. So for the thread, and let's run the star messages. So we get all of these Gmail threads. And for the thread itself, if we select the thread, we don't have an opportunity to star, so there's no option for star. The starring is only per message, so it's not for the thread itself. So you can't star the whole thread, you can only star a message. So we need to get the messages out of the threads. So let's create an object and messages. And within the thread, we want to get the messages that are contained within the threads. And then that way, once we loop through the messages, then from there, we can loop through them and select each one of the message objects and apply a star if we want to that. And we're also going to be checking to see what the subject is for the messages. And this actually should be messages, and looping through each one of the messages. And let's, within the logger, log for the message and get the subject for the message. And we want to check that if there's a value within the subject. So we can take the string value, so we can get the subject. And this is the value that we're going to be testing. So get subject. And we can, within the subject itself, we've got an opportunity to check to see if it includes and whatever word that we're looking for it to include. And I'll just give this finder. So we're looking to see if it includes the word, let's take the word alert. So if it includes the word alert, then we'll return back those messages. So we've got a bunch of those there. So if it includes what we're looking for within the finder, and if it does, then we want to add a star to it. So first let's log out the value of test. And I'm only going to log out the subject if test is true. So if test, then I'm going to log out the subject. Otherwise, we're not going to log out the subject. So that will cut down on some of the details that we have within the log. Let's run the script and check the messages to star. So we get a bunch of them that are false, and then we've got a few that are true. And it's also logging out the subject, so those are within the security alerts. So for the bulk of them, they are false, and these are messages, not the threads that we're logging out. That's why there's so many. So if it is true, then we can take the message and let's star the message. And star requires a Boolean value. So you can set the star with just a regular default star, and then you can also unstar it. So let's run through, and we're going to set the star to the messages. And that should add a star to each one of the messages that we have alert. And we can also check within the starred. So now it's applied the star to those messages. Let's select all of them. And we're going to remove the star. And let's run the script one more time. So only within the star we should have those 3 messages that are the alerts that are coming from the inbox. So there's the 3 messages. So they've got the stars. And now every time we run it, we shouldn't find any more with stars. So they should all just be false. And those are coming back as true because they do have the value of alert. So we can unstar them as well. So if they have a star, then let's unstar them. So let's check to see. And check to see if it has a star. So the message. So that's the unstar. We can do a check to see if it is starred. And we'll log that out within the log now. Then we'll comment out the other ones. So it's checking to see if the message has star. And this is on the message level as well. So let's remove out some of the logs there. So it's very simple and straightforward. So we're just checking to see if it has star. So they're all coming back false. And then we do have a few that are coming back true that have a star. So we can check, and this is a Boolean value. So let's check to see if the message, so if it has a star, then we're going to unstar it. If it doesn't have a star, then we will star it. So let's add in another condition and have this as a Boolean value. And now what we're going to be doing is toggling if it has a star. And if it doesn't have a star, well, if it's otherwise, we're just going to unstar it. So we'll unstar all of them by default. So see what happens. So now we should only be logging out the ones that are starred. And actually, if we want to do it to the ones that are not starred, so just put the exclamation mark in front of there. So if they are starred, it's going to come back as true, but we're going to be checking to see if they're not starred. So if this is not true, then we're going to set the star. Otherwise, we're going to unstar it. So let's see how that works. So going through and checking to see and unstarring a bunch. and do a quick refresh here on the starred messages. So we already got one that's gone. And this is actually slowing down quite a bit of the execution. So let's flip that around, because now it's unstarring all of these messages. So that's taking a while. And we'll just make sure that it is starred. And flip that around, and let's try that again. So if it includes the word alert, if that's true, and the message is starred, so if that's true, then we're going to unstar it. Otherwise, if it includes just the word test, then we're going to apply a star to it. So save it, and let's run that one more time. So I think last time we were just getting way too many messages. So we've selected the 4 messages, we've applied a star to it. And let's run that one more time. So this time we should be removing some of those messages, so we should be unstarring them. So that leaves us with no messages because we did the opposite here where we unstarred them. So that's how you can star and unstar. Coming up next, we're going to look at labels. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at labels and how we can apply labels. So let's create a function, and we'll just call it test labels. So this is going to be a function where we're going to be looping through and getting some of the Gmail app contents and applying some labels to them. So going through the content, and we're going to focus on the content within the inbox so that we've got specific content that we're looking for. So let's apply, and first we'll create a label as well. So let's create a function to create a label. And create my label. So how do we create a label? And this is just going to be the new label. And I'll just call it new label tester. So using the Gmail app, create label. And this is requiring a string value. So within the my name, we're going to create a label. And this we'll set a variable, because there's a return value. So within the logger, log out the contents of my label. So let's run the create my label function. So what it did is it created a Gmail label. So now within the labels that have available, and just do a quick refresh so I can see all of my labels that I have available. And the best way really to see the labels is to select the labels option. And there's the new label that we just created, so new label tester. So what we want to do is we want to apply this label object, and this is returned back as a label object. So there are some parameters that are available within the label. So once you have that as a label, you can add it to threads. You can get it from threads, and you can select the labels and apply them to different threads, so you can get the name of the label as well. So let's find the label, and we'll get the label. So selecting the label that we just created, so const, and creating an object, my label, using the Gmail app. We want to get labels by name. So selecting the label by the name, and this is where we can just copy the my name. And selecting the label by the my name variable value. And let's use the logger log. And it's going to log out the my label as a label object. And then that's going to allow us to return it back by name and also assign it that object as needed. So let's go to test labels, and we'll run. So we were successfully able to get the label back. And you're probably wondering, okay, well, what happens if I have a label that doesn't exist? So let's see what happens and what gets returned back. So null gets returned back. So if you want to make sure that the label exists, then you're just going to be checking to see if my label. So we can have a condition that checks to see if my label actually exists and if it's found. And if it is, then we want to loop through and we want to apply the label to some of the emails that we have. So let's loop through and we'll get the emails that we have within the inbox, and then this is where we can apply the label to. So similar to what we did in the last lesson, where we get the inbox threads. So we get all of the threads that are currently within the email. And we're actually going to be applying the label to the thread. So the labels are applied at the thread level as opposed to where the stars were applied to the message. So the entire thread is going to get the label. It's not email or message specific. So with the threads, we can loop through the threads. So using for each to get the thread object. So return it back as a thread. So within the log for the thread itself, we can get the messages, we can get the labels that are applied to it, we can get the ID of it, we can get the first message subject. So let's return back the first message subject. And this is going to loop through, and it's going to, we have the label as an object, so we're ready to apply the label when we need to. So let's loop through the inbox and get the first message subject. So that's going to return back the first message subject. And now we have a value that we can use. And that's going to be the first message subject. So we can check that value. So if val includes, and whatever word we want to look for. So previously we did look for alert. Maybe we want to look for attachment. So if it includes the word attachment, so we've got a few emails there that have the word attachment. So we're looking for the value if the subject includes attachment. And if it does, then what we're going to do is we're going to apply a label of the new test label. So that means that we've got the thread and we can apply a label. So using add label, and then it's expecting the label object, which we have within the my label value. And let's clean the code up a bit. So now what this application is going to do, so the test labels function is going to first check to see if the label exists. And if it does, then it's going to go through all the inbox threads. And then as it loops through them, it's going to check the first message subject. And if it includes the word attachment, then it's going to add the label to those messages, to those threads. So let's run the code, and we'll see if we get the label attached to them. And we do have the label, so if you want, you can also update the labels as well. So you can apply different colors to the labels. So let's add a label color to it, so nice and red, so it stands out. So that's our inbox, and now we've successfully applied labels to there. We can also remove labels as well. So the same way that we're adding the labels, we can remove the labels. So here, if it's got the word attachment, instead of adding a label, let's take the thread and do a remove of the label. And again, identify it by the label object. So now when we run it, if it has the word attachment, it's going to remove the label. So when we refresh it, all those labels should be gone, all the ones that we just added. Let's create one more where we can run through and we can add the label test. And so starting again, add test label. And so let's set up the value for the label. It's just going to say test. And then it's going to do the same check here. So get label by name. And if the label object doesn't exist, and I'm going to use let because if it doesn't exist, then I'm going to create it. So we'll check to see if my label exists. And if it doesn't exist, so if it is equal to null, so if my label equals null, then we need to create the label. And creating the label, we saw how easy it is to create the label. So we assigning it to the variable myLabel. We're going to create the label with the name of val. And then this way, we know that the myLabel exists. And for the label, you can remove it from all of the threads. You can delete the label. You can get the name of the label. You can get the threads that the label is currently in. So right now this is a brand new label, so we don't have threads that it's currently in. And if we want to loop through all of the threads, so same thing that we did here where we're looping through, and if the my label, but we know that the my label now exists because we've created it if it's null. So looping through all of the emails and returning back the threads as the thread object. We want to just apply a label. So we're going to do the same thing that we just did here where we're going to get the first message and give it a variable name of first so that we're not overwriting the val. And then we'll check to see if within first, if it includes the label name. And if it does, so if first does include it, and actually just do this within a condition. So save us the line of code. And if this is true, so if it includes val, then we're going to attach the label to the thread. So thread, add label, and the label that we're going to be adding is the my label object. So now we're going to run through, add the test label, and add the test label to all of the threads in the inbox that have a name of, that have test included into the title. And let's run the add test labels. So my name is not defined. So let's see what the problem here is, that we're looking for the label, and I used the variable val instead of label. So let's run that one more time. So make a quick update there, run it. So now it's adding the word test to all of the emails in the inbox, all the threads that have the word test. So there it added the test label. And we can go down to the test label and add a color to it so it's easier to find. And because these are case sensitive, so it's looking for the uppercase value of it. So let's do it as uppercase and run. So now it's going to check and it's going to apply test to all of the uppercase. So it applied it to all of them and applied the label of test. So within the labels themselves, notice that we didn't apply a new label. So test lowercase and test uppercase are the same label. And it's just when we're checking to see if the string value is matching what we're searching for, it has to be, it is case sensitive. So if you are looking for, just make sure that you do have the right case for the variable that you're looking for. And that's how you can add and remove labels. And you can also get all of the threads that have the label. So get all test. And we'll loop through all of those. So this is going to list out all of the threads. So we need to identify the label first. So let's get the label object. And this is going to be just the ones with the label of test. And once we have the label object, then we can get the threads that are included that have that label. And once we have the threads, we can use for each to loop through them and then return back the thread object. And let's just log out from the thread. And then of course you can do whatever you need to do. We'll get the message subject there and we'll log the subject into the console. So this is just to get all of the threads that have the label that we're looking for. So let's run that function. And then once you select the email threads, then you can apply different functions. You can loop through the messages and you can do the other Gmail app functionality to them. Within the Gmail app class, you can also get the chats. So there's a number of chats here within the Hangouts, and that's contained within the Gmail app. So let's just grab all of those chats and count how many chat we have. So give it a function chat. And this is also threads as well. So these are thread objects. So looping through, and we're going to track how many chat threads we have. So let's create an object and we'll call it threads using the Gmail app class. get the chat threads. And for here, you can also set some parameters between the threads that you want to get. So you can have a starting value and also the max amount of threads, so where you want to start. So get the first 50 chats is going to be 0, so starting at chat or thread 0 and getting 50. So we'll log no more than 50. So that's how you can set 50. So whatever the charting start value is, and I don't have a lot, so I'm going to just start at 0, but if we can set the max, and this is optional, otherwise we'll just get all of them. So if I want to only get the first 2, I can get those threads that way. And then just as we saw before, the threads is going to create an object that we can iterate through. So it's going to create an object with all of the threads. So let's run the code. And that gives us a Gmail thread object. And that means that just as we've seen before, we can use for each to loop through and grab each one of the threads as a separate item. And then within the logger log, we'll log out the thread object. So run that again. So we just have the one actually, so I don't even have a whole lot. I only have the one object there. And within the thread, so from the threads, the chat threads, we can get the number of messages. So we can get the messages that are within that thread. And there's a number of other parameters that you can get, and that's all using the thread object. So it tells me that there's 2 messages within this chat. And this is just a regular typical thread object. So all of the stuff that you can get with the regular thread, you can get the message count, you can get all of the messages, and then you can loop through the messages as well. So let's set up an object for messages and get the messages that are within the thread. And then for messages, using for each, and I do need to have the rounded brackets to invoke the function. So for each, we can get each one of the messages within the messages object. So logger log, and then that's going to return back a message object. So the messages themselves, so we've got 2 Gmail messages there within the chat threads, and then we can return back the contents of the messages. So that's just a regular message object that then we've got all of the typical message methods that we have. So we can do a reply to that. We can check if it's starred, priority. We can forward it. We can get the attachments and so on. So all of that information is there. We can get the date from ID. So all of them will also have unique IDs as well. And it's up to you. You can select content from the messages and you can make updates to them, replies, and so on. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be searching our inbox. So search inbox, and we can search for particular message values and just create a quick function in order to handle that. So search inbox. And what we want to do, and we want to apply this to the main Gmail app, and that's going to return back the results of the search. So creating a variable to hold the results, and then using the Gmail app and search. So there are some parameters that we can enter in here. So one of them is going to be the search query, and then also we can add in a start and an end point. So where we want to start the search from, and what message we want, and how many we want to return back at max. So if we want to search for a term, Google does have a listing of the search operators you can use within Gmail. So these are the same thing that you would expect. We can do something like search for a subject for dinner. We can also search from who, and all of this is just typical what you would find in a typical search. So we can also remove the results that have these values. So you can really fine tune the values that you're searching for. So let's actually search for ones that have an attachment. And this is expecting a string value within the search parameter arguments. And you can put 3 different arguments in there. So you can also have a start as well as a max. Let's log out the results, and then we'll change what we're logging. So this was just the results. And then we'll change what we're searching for, some of the different search parameters. Let's run this and see what we've got for search. So we do get 3 or 5 items being returned back. And we can also limit it, so starting at 0, and if we want to have a max of 2 items to return back, run it again. So it's going to return back just the 2 latest items that we find within the search results. And then once we do get the results back, we can loop through the results. And this is going to loop through and return back the result that we have. So it's going to be a thread, and output the thread object. Now let's run that one more time. So we're getting that Gmail thread object. And then if we want, within the Gmail thread, if we want to get more information from the search, then, or from the thread, we can get the messages as well. So we can set up an array that's just going to loop through all of the messages. So from the thread, let's get the messages that are within the thread. And then take messages and use the loop to loop through and get back each one of the messages. And then this way we can check out each one of the messages separately. So within the logger log, we take the message object, and here if we wanted to, we could star it, we could add a label to it, or we'll actually add a label to the thread. We can get the thread, add a label to it. We can get the content, so the raw content of it if we want. So the number of options here, we can also reply to them, forward it. So let's actually select the content. And we're going to just output that into the log. And run through. And that's just outputting all of the raw content. So it's outputting the content, the file content as well. So there's quite a bit of stuff that gets output there within the raw content. But once you've made the search, you can select, and then once you've got the thread, you can get the messages and just the typical stuff that you can do with the thread class. So that's contained within the Gmail thread, and then you can get the Gmail message class, so you can apply labels to them using the Gmail label class. You can create and construct drafts, and also you can find out more about the attachment. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next lesson. We're going to be looking more deeper into what we can find out about the attachment, because now that we can locate all of the items that have an attachment, let's see what we can do with the Gmail attachment class. That's coming up next. In the last lesson, we looked how we can do the search operators, and we can search for all of the Gmails that have attachments. So let's take a closer look at the attachments. So we're going to use the code that we had from the last lesson, and we're getting the attachments that are available within the threads. And this is going to allow us to get more details about the attachment. So once we know that the email, the message does have an attachment, we can get the attachment details. So sending that, and let's create a name, attachments, and select from the message and do a get attachments. So it's going to get all of the attachments, and logger log. And as we know, it's an opportunity. There's an option that there could be more than one attachment to each message. So that's why the attachments is plural. So we're getting attachments within an array. I'm going to comment out the other parts, and we're selecting only the ones that have attachments from the search. So that gives us and returns back the Gmail attachment class. And from the Gmail attachment class, we can get some details about those attachments. So returning back the attachments, so looping through each one of the attachments. And I'll just call it data to be a little bit simpler. And within the logger log, let's output whatever the contents of data is. So it's looping through all of the messages, getting the attachments, and some might have more than one attachment. So we're going to be looking through all of the attachments. So looking at, and each one has, it looks like one Gmail attachment. So that means that we can copy those attachments. We can return a copy of it as a blob if we want. And if we want to turn it into a PDF, maybe save it to our drive. Let's take a quick look, and we do have a few of the attachments here. So let's just get the first few attachments, and I'm going to limit this to only the 3 attachments. And we'll get the name of the files first, and then we'll convert them into blobs and save them to our drive. So let's run through the script one more time, and this time we should just return back the names. So these are all the PDF files that we have. So let's select and create and get the PDF as a blob. So get the file, and that's data, and using the get blob. And we can also get as. So if we have a specific content type, we can get as. If we want to just do a copy, we can copy the blob. And if we want to get it as a PDF, so we know that these are PDF types. Actually, let's just double check and get the meme type first so that we make sure that they are PDFs. So let's get the content type. And then we'll double check to make sure that these are all PDFs. So it's application PDF is the content type. So we'll do a condition to check to see if data get content type is equal to the application PDF. And if it is, then we know that this is just a regular PDF. So we can actually get the file. So we can return the data inside this object as a blob, convert it into a specific type. So let's create our PDF from this, and using the data get as, and then we want to get it as an application PDF. So this is going to return back that content as a PDF. Let's also add one more option here, that if it is a PDF, then what we're going to do is we're going to save it to the drive. So creating a name, and I'm going to create a variable that's going to run in the background. So starting at 0, so this will allow us to create distinct names. And every time we create a PDF, we're going to update the value of counter. So just increment it by 1. And now let's create the file. So we already have the file, and we already have it as a blob, and we've forced it to be a PDF. So we know that they are PDFs, and we're copying them as a PDF blob. And using the drive app, let's create a brand new file. And that's using the drive app class. We can create a file, and using the blob that we just created, so that's the PDF blob, and creating a file out of that. And now let's take the file, and we're going to set a name to the file. And this can be new PDF, as we know they're all going to be PDFs. And then concatenate the counter to it so that we have a different file name. And then because they are PDFs, let's provide the extension of PDF. And we'll run the code and just make sure that we can add the PDFs. So searching through and checking to see all of the attachments. And if we go to the drive, we see that it's duplicated and it's created all the files that were attached and all the attachments that it found. So there's also ways that we can loop through and we can check to see if the attachments are Google files. And there's a lot of information that we can collect off of the attachments. So we can find things from the attachments themselves, and we can saw how we can get the name, we can get the content type. So within the attachment, we can get the number of bytes. So the bytes is going to return back the data stored as a blob in bytes. So it's going to return back that value. There's also other values as well, so we can get the content type. So we saw that. We can get the data as a string, so this gets the data of the blob as a string in the UTF code. You can also check to see if it's a Google type. So this is going to return back a Boolean value, checking to see if it is a Google type. And if it is, this is going to be looking for an attachment to sheets, docs, etc. So anything from the Google Workspace files. You can also check to see and get the, you can set the content type as well, and you can set the name of that item. So if I wanted to rename it, I can rename and set the name of it. So if I want to rename all the attachments, I could do it that way as well. So there's a number of options, and you can look through the different methods that are available for the Gmail attachment class. And this is essentially how you can loop through and get all of them that are contained. And of course, you can update the max. So right now it's a max of 3. If we want to do a max of 5, we can max out at 5. And that's going to loop through and get up to 5 different attachments that are PDFs. So they all have to be in the first 5. And as we can see, we have some PNG files that are attachments and so on. So they're not actually going to get created in as PDFs. And the same way that we did the PDFs, we can pick up the images and store images to our drive as well. Hey, in this lesson, we're going to be providing a quick overview of the Gmail app service and some of the functions that we've covered earlier. So let's just create a tester function. And within the tester function, we can pull back some data. So let's set up some variables here and use the Gmail app. And of course, the easiest way to select the different functions is just to use within the editor and do a dot. And then whenever you do the dot, you're going to have all these options here. So we saw most of them in action. You can get the spam threads. You can get the starred threads. So these are just returning back the Gmail thread objects. And then from the Gmail thread objects, then we saw how we can loop through them. So that's going to return back an array of items. And these are all coming back as threads. So anything that is returning back one of the threads, then you can use the thread class in order to dive deeper into what's contained within there. So those are the 5 main classes that are contained within the Gmail service. So that's the Gmail thread, and the messages are contained within the thread. So that's the other class. There's also the Gmail label. So the labels are also contained within the Gmail app, so you can create labels and get labels. So if you want to add in a label, you can search it on the main part. So that was, I'll just call it my label. And that's the label app. The label class is directly within the Gmail app. So where we would get and we'd create labels. So we get user labels. So that's going to return back an array of all of the labels. And then you can use the my labels, and actually I'll just do labels so it's plural. So because we are returning back multiples, we can loop through all of the labels and then return back the labels. And then within the logger log, if we want to select a certain label, we can get the label name and do it with that method. So for the threads, the attachments are also within the threads. The drafts are on the main part. So if we want to create a draft object, we can use the Gmail app. And from here, we can get and create drafts. So if we want to create a draft, we can do that directly within the Gmail app. So that would be accessing whenever we're creating a draft, that's going to create the Gmail draft. So for the draft itself, it's relatively straightforward, where it's looking for an email address. And I'll just get the email address. And actually, we'll just send in a test email, test, as we're not going to be actually sending these out. So test@gmail, and then it requires a subject and then also a body value. So same as the sending of the mail, where we can create a draft that way. And that will create a draft class. So within the logger log, let's create a draft. And I'll call it create a draft message. So to avoid confusion with the function, that's create a draft. And I'll just shorten this so it's on the one line. So let's also, within the logger log, we'll loop through the threads. And then within the threads, that's where we can access the message class. So these are all the labels that we have, so we're just outputting the labels. And if we want to apply labels, we can get the label ID and we can check against the name. So we can check to see if the name is a particular value, and then that's how we can get the label object and then apply those labels to the threads if needed. So within the threads as well, we can select the thread and apply a label to it. So if we wanted to, for instance, within the drafts, so we've got all of the, so this is the starred messages. So for the thread of the starred messages, if we want to add a label, we do have the labels within a label object. So setting up whatever the first label is, we'll apply that label to all of the items that are starred. Let's see what we got for starred. We don't have anything starred, so let's star some content. And we apply stars to the messages. So now if I go into starred, I've got a bunch of messages that are starred. So let's see if we can apply the label to those stars. So now we've got the label, the first label, which was test. So that gets applied to the starred content. And that's how we can use the Gmail label class that's contained within the Gmail app. So there's a lot of opportunity to mix and match. And then also we saw how we can connect the spreadsheet service as well as the G Drive service, where we can create files and connect them together to build more powerful applications that are incorporating multiple Google Apps Script services together. Thanks again for taking the section on the Gmail app service. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And I'll see you in the next one.